The SEC explicitly stated that XRP itself was not a security, it's just code. Their only legal argument was that Ripple sold it as a security. And the SEC prevailed, in part, so it sounds like your real gripe is with Ripple, which violated the law. This is a bizarre attempt to rewrite history. Among other obvious contradictions between this and the facts, how is this consistent with arguing that Ripple's sales of XRP on exchanges were offerings of securities contracts? The SEC absolutely argued that holders of XRP reasonably expected profits from Ripple's efforts and were in effect partners in a shared venture. What other theory could encompass sales at exchanges? You may wish to read the SEC's memo in support of its motion for summary judgment again. I'm simply paraphrasing the SEC's own briefs. You're not paraphrasing it, you're drastically changing its meaning. In your defense, this is what the SEC was expecting people to do. But I think you're smarter than that. The SEC is absolutely not conceding here that the only issue is whether Ripple sold it as a security as you claim. It is merely conceding that XRP is not per se a security, that is, would necessarily be a security regardless of any facts and circumstances surrounding it other than its inherent nature as a digital token. And there are several ways we know this is true. One is their claim that Ripple's sales on exchanges were offerings of securities. What else is there in those sales? And another is the structure of their primary argument under Howey that said all they needed to show was that XRP holders participated in a joint venture where they reasonably expected profits due to Ripple's efforts. Again, this is a bizarre attempt to rewrite history. The SEC is absolutely not saying what you say they are saying here. You're free to read those words any way you'd like. But since proving a Section 5 violation doesn't require them to prove XRP is per se a security, and they expressly concede they are not doing so, I don't see a basis to quarrel with the plain language of their argument. I agree. The problem is that you are falsely characterizing the argument they are making as a different argument they are not making. For example, you said, their only legal argument was that Ripple sold it as a security, but that's not true. A concession that there could be a world in which XRP would not be a security because XRP is just code is absolutely not a concession that XRP is only a security in this world because of the way Ripple is selling it. Sorry, I'm not following you. To prove a violation of Sec 5, they needed to establish Ripple sold XRP as a security, and they say exactly that. Are you inferring they are arguing something more? Based on what? They might have to take that on when suing exchanges, but not here. You are ignoring the entire thrust of their argument, their statements around it, and the pushback they got from the court. This is an attempt at completely rewriting history. The complaint itself frequently refers to XRP itself as the security. The SEC's press release complained Ripple sold XRP without a registration statement. It described Chris and Brad as security holders. There was only one Howey analysis, and the SEC argued it applied to all sales or offers of XRP by Ripple, including blind sales on exchanges. The SEC rejected the idea that each type of sale had to be analyzed individually. But the most clear evidence that this is an absurd rewriting of history was the SEC's and the SEC chair's public statements. This image is an excerpt from Gensler's speech. I'm not defending what I think was a lack of nuance in how the SEC framed its legal theories. It certainly felt like their points evolved over time, not surprising given the novelty of the issues. But ultimately, the Ripple case came down to whether it sold XRP as securities. Right, but let's not forget that's because the courts soundly rejected the SEC's arguments, both to the courts and to the public to the contrary. That was correctly understood to be a substantial victory at the time. Bit of an overstatement. The few enforcement cases decided on the merits went at least in part the SEC's way. The SEC was absolutely arguing that most tokens were securities, period. This was both to courts and to the public. Had Ripple settled the case rather than fighting, the SEC absolutely would have continued to claim that we settled because XRP was, like most tokens, a security. You seem to have entered this thread specifically to argue against exactly this point. That is, as I said, an attempt to rewrite history in a very significant way. That the SEC prevailed only partially shows that courts, correctly, rejected the position the SEC made both to the public and to the courts that necessarily meant that the specifics of the offering made no difference. Most issuers sold tokens as securities in violation of Section 5 under Howey doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Neither does whatever this is. But it absolutely does not reflect the view you are claiming is the SEC's view. It reflects the view everyone at the time, including the SEC, thought was their view.